time I doubt your goodness, you show me you are with us. What a good God, bringing me back to life, opening up my eyes, God of every blessing, standing by my side, calling me by name. I won't be afraid, faithful to your promise, you will make a way.
Good morning. It's really nice to be here. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. My name is Lena Scholman, and I grew up just around the corner on an apple farm on the side road here. Sid and Jane are my parents, so it's really nice to come home to this community and to be with you this morning. For the past 25 years, I've lived not here in Thornbury, but in Waterloo, in Vancouver, in Burlington, and for the last 17 years in Hamilton. And in Hamilton, I'm a writer. Thank you, Jen, for the plug for my book. I didn't know you were allowed to do that in church, but that's pretty great. I am an educator and an ecumenical networker and a story coach. And so this morning, I want to bring greetings from my home church community, New Hope Church, Hamilton, and kind of the way that Paul used to do in his letters, how he would bring greetings from one community of believers to another community of believers. And I want to thank you. I really appreciate how you gather your community in the morning and you share the prayers of the people. And I know that this church community has prayed for a dear friend of mine over the years named Marta, that prayers traveled from Hamilton to this community. Our friend Marta had a double lung transplant 2 years ago. And a week ago, she was here enjoying Georgian Bay with her whole family from Colombia who came to celebrate her renewed health and strength. So I really appreciate that. My prayer for you is that your souls would find rest today. Thank you for reading from Galatians. The fruit of the Spirit is patience, and we acquire patience. God wants to grow patience in us when we rest. And so I hope that if you're on vacation this week or this summer, that your souls would find rest from your labor. Paul writes in Galatians 5 this. Just before the fruits of the Spirit, he writes, when you attempt to live by your own religious plans and projects, you're cut off from Christ and you fall out of grace. And I'm someone who loves the church and church people. And if you're into the Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 1, the worst. And I'm constantly striving to do the right thing. And this should have been a warning for me. But I'm not easily warned. So let's dive in. This morning I'm going to share a story with you, and I've titled this story, Chaos as Spiritual Formation, and maybe the subtitle could be A Cautionary Tale About Religious Plans and Projects. So, settle in. In the beginning, there was a man with a sword, a man with no pants, and a lot of screaming kids running around in circles. And all of this is happening in the same room. Also, everyone was eating Timbits, and a few were stuffing them in their pockets and in their shirts, and someone played a worship song on an untuned piano. Someone else was playing Don't Stop Believin', the Journey version, Don't Stop Believing. And this was New Hope Church, and I found myself wondering, what was I doing there? So chapter 1, Sword Guy. You guys gotta visit New Hope. It's in your neighborhood. I think the time is right for you now that things have settled. Now that things have settled. It's 2012. Our small family took a risk and we started a business. And we lost all of our money in the first 3 years. We moved from white-collar Burlington near the lake to blue-collar Hamilton near the steel mills. It's only 10 minutes away, but it's a world of difference across the bridge if you know that part of the lake. We had 2 kids. We liked stability, but we'd just gone through a season of chaos, including fires and frozen plains. We were in the flower business, and we burnt the flowers, and then we froze the flowers. So things were not going awesome. We'd driven past this church, New Hope, many times, and it kind of had a vinyl sign on a sandwich board. It looked very temporary, like it might close up tomorrow. And we just kept thinking, well, maybe, but we weren't quite sure. Maybe not yet. And still, something in us wanted to worship in our community, to worship with our neighbors and not drive back to our old community. So finally, we bundled up our young children and we walked into the Perkins Center. I think I have a picture of the Perkins Center in the next slide. Yeah, there it is. We walked into the Perkins Center. It's a nondescript apartment building, and this is where New Hope meets. The first thing I noticed was this large plexiglass portrait of an old, bearded black man, John Perkins himself. You can see him there in his hat. Kind of like Mike's hat, actually. I'd never heard of John Perkins or his fight for racial injustice and prison reform in the United States. I didn't know the story of his unlawful incarceration decades earlier. I was used to walking into churches and seeing a portrait of Jesus. Maybe you know the one. It's an oil painting. Jesus is white. He has blonde hair, a white robe, and a blue sash, even though I'm not sure that that's what Jesus actually looked like, but that's what I was used to. But I was going to have to get to know John Perkins. So light floods into this space where there are people sitting around round tables. The Perkins Center is an old bar in East Hamilton that had been retrofitted by Indwell, which is an organization of supportive housing for people with various mental health challenges. Light streams through the atrium, and large windows open onto a busy street, Kenilworth Avenue, the main thoroughfare that connects the steel mills to the escarpment, what we call in Hamilton the mountain. Someone came to say hello, and they offered us some coffee, and the coffee was unlike any church coffee I'd ever had. It was really good. It was really good coffee. They liked their fresh coffee roasted and delivered by a local person. So I was quite impressed. We sat at the back, unsure of which table to join, and we listened to a long period of communal prayers. And the crowd was a mix of professors, landscapers, entrepreneurs, and tenants of the Indwell building. And it wasn't obvious who belonged to which demographic. People prayed out loud for their suicidal neighbors, for their friends who'd suffered from an overdose, for the government, for a child with cancer, and for a dog with lumps on his neck. We closed our eyes, and when I opened them, there was a man beside me with a 3.5-foot katana sword draped over his knees. And I kind of gathered my kids a little closer and put them on my lap. And I looked at my husband kind of like, okay. The service continued, and people got up and walked around to get more coffee during the sermon. Nobody seemed too concerned about Sword Guy, even though he kind of tapped it on the cement floor kind of in a warning, like, just so you know, I know how to use this sword. I wasn't sure. The coffee was awesome, and the people were friendly. Would we come back next week? A man came by our table with a box of Timbits, and my kids' eyes lit up like it was Christmas. How's this sound? Can you hear me okay? All right. If I close my eyes, I can still feel the specific bodies of the people who surrounded me when I was a kid in the pews of the church where I grew up. Sometimes I got bored in church, so I spent a lot of time making up stories or drawing or just observing the people who looked like they were falling asleep. You can tell by the slow head nod and then the sudden jerk. But the church that I grew up in wasn't chaotic. It was very stable, and I think you tend to like what you know. Chapter 2, No Pants Man. All right. You can't judge a church by their pews, or in this case, by the seats around a table. So Sword Guy freaked me out a little bit. But to know someone or something, you have to get involved. You can't just sit back watching, right? We quickly learned that New Hope was a community that liked to eat together, a lot. My brothers and sisters at this new community liked to have potlucks all the time. And this was not so great for me, because I have to admit to you that I do not really like potlucks. I liked potlucks a lot when I was a kid, because you could have as much dessert as you wanted. And people here in the Beaver Valley make really, really good pies, and I ate them all. But that phase ended. I grew out of it. I don't really even like buffets. I don't even like the Mandarin. I don't like the disorderly, my son is shaking his fist because he's a teenager and he just about put the Mandarin out of business last month. But anyways, I'm not a fan. I don't like all the mixed foods that don't go together. You know, potatoes and macaroni, wilted salads, and also casseroles that you kind of know are just made up of people's leftovers, right? Like they kind of are, with cheese on top. And I will admit to you, if you didn't already know, I can be a big snob about certain things. And also a germaphobe. I can't handle everybody licking their fingers and then touching all those spoons and then licking the fingers and then, okay, some of you are nodding your heads. You are my people. We're gonna hand sanitize after. So this church really loves potlucks. And we are there to get involved. Swordman is taking a break. There's no danger in sight, and you can't know something until you experience it. Do you know the quote, "You only love what you know, and you only know what you experience"? So we're diving in, and we're serving alongside others. And basically, I discover that experiencing New Hope means cooking and washing dishes all the time, sometimes picking up garbage and mopping the floor. It's like regular life, but with others. It's like regular life with more dishes, sometimes weird food combinations, and a much higher chance of getting the flu. It felt chaotic. I wasn't really sure, but I got my plate of food, macaroni and mashed potatoes, wilted salad, leftover casserole, and I sat down beside this man. We get chatting, and the next thing I know, his pants are down. Oh my stars. Now my appetite is totally gone, and I really don't like potlucks. And the leaders of the church, they swoop in to my table. They kind of see what's going on, and they say, "Lena, we're so sorry. We forgot to mention." And I'm thinking, forgot to mention? Forgot to mention? As a kid, I wasn't really afraid of strangers. My parents are very social. They like to gather new people together all the time. But there are some things that I didn't experience. I didn't know very much about bipolar depression or personality disorders. I didn't know much about homelessness or addictions, about trauma and PTSD. And I wasn't really sure I wanted to learn. I mean, I definitely didn't need to see any more pants down at potlucks. So this church was so welcoming, so gracious, such good coffee, but so chaotic, so unclothed. I just wasn't sure. Deep down, I knew that faith was formed in community and not in isolation, that worshiping together was life-giving, is life-giving, that holiness is a byproduct of commitment, but I wasn't sure. I looked around for my family. The kids were really hyper, really hyper. They looked like crazed chipmunks, and their mouths were full of Timbits. So chapter 3, will the kids be all right? My kids loved those Timbits. But were they learning anything about Jesus? We'd come from a community where there were streamlined programs for faith formation at every age and stage, in tidy classrooms with a volunteer army performing dramas and even making tabernacles out of popsicle sticks. New Hope didn't have that many young kids, so our services were intergenerational, which is a really fancy way of saying they were kind of a gong show. Someone would start to sing, and some kids would take streamers and dance. But then when it was time to transition into the message, the kids would take those stick streamers and start, what would they do? You know, there's heads nodding. They would start sword fighting, so we're back to swords again. And then one day, I just couldn't take it anymore. I gathered up all the little ones like a very kind of kind army sergeant, and I sat them in a circle at the back of the atrium underneath the floating birds art installation. And I kind of improvised a little Sunday school lesson, and the kids kind of calmed down. And then one of the leaders came by and threw a box of crayons at me, and he smiled and he says, "Oh, this is awesome. This is so New Hope." And my heart just sank. Was it always going to be like this? Were we happy with this kind of improvised action? I really struggled to understand his cheerfulness. Didn't he appreciate that our kids weren't learning anything in this environment? I was frustrated because he was looking at me affectionately, like I was embracing teaching cross-legged on the sticky floor without even so much as a felt board or Veggie Tales to help me along. And I was upset because he looked at me like I was in, like I got the message that church was messy, but now I truly belonged. Yikes. I didn't share his belief that mess was good. Did I want to belong to this chaos that kind of embarrassed me? What I wanted was to bring some order into this chaos, some structure, some rules, no swords, some policy, clothes on at all times. I didn't want a lifetime of participation in chaos. So that afternoon, I said to my husband, I wasn't sure if I could hack it. I wasn't sure that I had the personality for New Hope, for a church that practiced the values that first you belong to the community, and maybe someday you'll believe what the community believes, which is that God loves you deeply. I loved the ideals, but what if our kids never learned the hymns we grew up with? Or learned to sit still, for that matter. I'm not sure if that's important. But wasn't Gideon quite important? He seemed very important to me when I was a kid. I was quite sure my kids had never heard of Gideon. I'm getting lunch on the table, and I'm starting to do that thing where you spin, and you just keep spinning and stressing about all the what ifs. And then my young son, my little son, walks into the kitchen, and he's singing a new song. All around, hope is springing up from this old ground. Out of chaos, life is being found in you. And my husband looks at me, and I'm stunned. He's stunned. How and where did he learn that? When? At church, we mostly observed him playing Lego and eating Timbits. So was that the moment that we decided to stay? Maybe, but the truth is we decide to stay every week. We show up. We check for swords and pants. A dozen years later, we do have Sunday school. And sometimes when we're not playing Duck, Duck, Goose or Doggy, Doggy, Who's Got the Bone, we talk about Jesus. David Benner, the Christian psychologist, says, it's not enough to know about God. You need to know God. and you only know what you experience. So how do my kids and other New Hope kids experience Jesus? I think they experience Jesus who loves potlucks, especially sticky ones. Jesus who loves a diverse crowd. Jesus who loves that John Perkins' portrait is in the entrance of our worship space. Jesus who loves seeing his children mopping the floor together. And what do I know about church these days? I know that chaos has forced me to improvise. There's really nothing holy about getting your own way. New Hope is shaping me. It has shaped me and is shaping me in ways that I could have never expected. Paul writes in Galatians 5, when you attempt to live by your own religious plans and projects, you're cut off from Christ and you fall out of grace. And so I want to read to you again from the Fruit of the Spirit. This is the version that you'll find in the Message, which I really like. What happens when you try to live God's way? When you submit to one another in love, for starters? When you abandon your religious plans and projects? God brings gifts into your life, much the same way that fruit appears in an orchard. Things like affection for others, exuberance about life, serenity. We develop a willingness to stick with things, a sense of compassion in the heart, and a conviction that a basic holiness permeates things and people. We find ourselves in loyal commitments, not needing to force our way in life, able to marshal and direct our energies wisely. So in the beginning, there was a man with a sword, a man with no pants, and kids running around in circles. And in the end, or what I hope is actually the middle, there's me, a no-nonsense, gentle, bossy lady with hand sanitizer. And she's saying, please put your sword away, please zip up your trousers, and hey kids, who wants a Timbit? Amen.